So as Lauren mentioned, I was here prior talking about the work of Dietrich, the life and teachings of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, my primary interest of research, and uh, I also am interested in the intersection of religion and theology and technology. And how I kind of came interested in that was during the pandemic. And because of it was during that time that so many of us really we became much more um, involved in the use of technology in our lives, more aware of it, I think, than many of us had ever become aware of it. And it was during that time that I had spent a lot more time reading and listening to podcasts. We had a lot more time to do things like that. And I came across a series of podcasts that was about artificial intelligence, and I started really becoming interested in that topic. And it was during I actually decided that I wanted to study it and write about it, and I ended up presenting a paper at the Adventist Society of Religious Studies at one of their conferences, and kind of realized that there was no Adventists that were actually talking about this topic. And this was before any generative AI had come out. There was no ChatGPT yet or anything like that. And I was really, saying, hey, this is something we should all be talking about and be concerned about. And now everybody's talking about it, everybody's concerned about it. But back then, nobody was really addressing it. So it's something that over the last several years that I've become increasingly interested in and have doing more and more further research in and talking about. So this has like become my along with Bonhoeffer, it's become like my primary research interest. And so there's a lot of intersections between religion and obviously technology. You can go back to the work of people like Jacques Ellul and others. And so it's something I wish I had probably done a deep dive into much earlier in my life. But never say never. You're never too late, right? To get started on something. So what you're going to get today is this has kind of led me down this road. And so when Dr. Plontok had organized this symposium on Christian nationalism, I said, Zach, I said, there's a topic here that needs to be addressed that I don't see on your list of, your people that are presenting. And this is a very major issue that no one's talking about. And that is the influence of technology on the rise of Christian nationalism. And that's the what I'm going to bring to you today is what I see as a major issue, and so we're going to present it. So the topic I'm going to share my screen with you, and we'll get into it here. So just bear with me here just a moment. All right, so here we go. Okay, yeah. So my topic today is titled "Engineered Outrage: How the Attention Economy Fostered the Conditions of Christian Nationalism." So let's begin with a story. Okay. So in 2018, researchers inside Facebook completed an internal study, and they brought their findings from their research to the company's leadership. And this included Mark Zuckerberg, who we all are aware of who that is, I hope. And so they brought this to their attention, came to them in a board meeting, brought this to them, this null information. They said, that they had discovered, and it was very alarming information. And so apparently Facebook's own algorithms had been exploiting the human brain's attraction to divisiveness. And if it was left unchecked, it was going to continue to feed users more and more extreme content. That's what they discovered. And so the researchers at that same time said, hey, look, we have some ideas how we can fix this. Okay, we can solve this problem. But after reading the report and discussing it for a while, Facebook's executives decided to what? Do you think they decided to fix it? No, they did not. They shelved it. And the reason is because the proposed corrections that their researchers, internal research, had come to them with would reduce engagement from their users, and it would hurt their bottom line. Now, It's interesting example in all this, and this is a really powerful example, I think, is that they discovered that Facebook's algorithm at the time was specifically programmed to weight the angry emoji, you've seen that, right? The angry emoji reaction 5 times more heavily than the like emoji. So that was 5 times more, right? So because the anger, I guess, apparently, gets more engagement than likes. And engagement, of course, is the product that is being sold on social media. So, uh, so we might have never, of course, known about any of this, except that in 2021, a Facebook employee named Frances Hogan copied tens of thousands of pages of internal documents and handed them to the Wall Street Journal. And when she testified before Congress, where she told lawmakers that Facebook's leadership knew its platforms were harming people and instead chose shareholder growth over public safety. And despite the public outcry that came from all this, and then this news broke, and the congregational hearings, no meaningful federal legislation has ever followed from all this. So the platforms to this day have continued to regulate themselves, which basically means they haven't regulated themselves. So again, we would have never have known this except for Frances Haugen had exposed it, had exposed the story, had exposed the story of Facebook's bad decision. And what it really is it is a window into a system, a business model, if you will, that has deliberately reshaped the conditions in which many of us form our beliefs, our fears, our loyalties, and really, um, even for many people, their sense of belonging and who they are. And so my argument today is, and you could say my thesis is this, that the current resurgence of Christian nationalism in America has, and even around the world in many ways, is hasn't happened in a vacuum. It's been fostered by the platforms of big tech. And the first that come to mind are, again, Facebook, who we're already talking about, YouTube, who's owned by Google, Instagram, who's also owned by Facebook or Meta, Google, others who deploy these algorithms that deliberately are designed to maximize emotional intensity, all for profit. And these platforms then have created conditions that systematically amplify, accelerate, and normalize radical ideological positions. And right-wing activists, media personalities, and Christian leaders have learned to weaponize these same platforms with extraordinary effectiveness. But I want to pause here and I want to be clear about something from the outset. And I'm going to return to this at the end because this is not a story unique to Christian nationalism. So, like before, we're like, oh, yes, look at those people, those Christian nationalists, because this is not just a particular partisan concern, because the attention economy does not take sides, it doesn't have political affiliation. It is a business model at the end of the day. And that business model rewards outrage, fear, tribal identity, regardless of where on the political or religious perspective or spectrum they appear. So Christian nationalism is our case study this morning or this afternoon, wherever you find yourself. But the conditions that produce it are conditions that form and have the potential to form every one of us, myself included, whether we recognize it or not. So then, with that, having said that, why Christian nationalism? Why has this movement in particular proven especially susceptible to what these platforms offer, to these algorithms that are designed this way? And I would suggest that we have to go back in history because that the answer requires a look back to the past. And so part of this is because forms of conservative American Christianity have always recognized, to their credit, the power of new communication technologies, and they have utilized them effectively. And in doing so, they have built up over generations the media habits and, in turn, the cultural grievances and apocalyptic narratives that the attention economy now has proven extraordinarily effective at exploiting. And so, understanding why the right has proven especially susceptible to this particular moment requires us to look at that history. So, not just a few years back, but we could even go back, I would say, 100 years or so. So, the story actually begins in the 1930s, where you had wealthy American industrialists like Texas oil magnate H.L. Hunt, the Sun Oil executive Howard Pugh. People like these were alarmed by Roosevelt's New Deal and by the rise of labor unions and by what they saw as government overreach into the American economy. And so their response wasn't simply political, it was propagandistic. And so they launched a massive campaign to fuse these ideas into a single, unassailable package. These were things like capitalism and Christianity with American patriotism. And so they used radio, which was just kind of really making inroad into America at that time, to deliver it directly into American living rooms. And they funded fundamentalist broadcasters like Carl McIntyre and Billy James Hargis, who reach millions of listeners each week with a potent mix of anti-communist, anti-regulatory rhetoric wrapped in the apocalyptic language of fundamentalist Christianity. And the financial infrastructure of industrial America quite literally built the distribution network of the early Christian right. And so this was not simply a grassroots religion finding its voice. This was religion being funded, shaped, and deployed for political ends. Now, Paul Matzko's book, the Radio Right, is really helpful here because he documents how these broadcasters didn't just use radio, they actually fought for it. For example, McIntyre's program, the 20th Century Reformation Hour, aired on just two radio stations in 1957. But by 1960, 3 years later, it had swelled to more than 100 stations nationwide. And his weekly listening audience reached an estimated 20 million Americans, 1 in 9 households at that time. And by the early 1960s, a dozen right-wing broadcasters each aired on 100 or more radio stations. So radio was really exploding at this time. So several had annual incomes exceeding $1 million a year. And it was at this time that John F. Kennedy was the first presidential candidate in American history who was forced to actually reckon with conservative domination of independent radio. And then, so when the FCC's fairness doctrine required balanced programming, these broadcasters mobilized against it. And so its eventual repeal in 1987 then opened the door to the one-sided political and religious broadcasting that would define the next era and where we find ourselves today. So the regulatory battle, the fight to control the medium, is a kind of a thread that runs straight through today's debates over content moderation and the laws that allow social media platforms to profit from harmful content without being held legally accountable for it. And you can see some of these debates that are going on right now. Some of those are over The View, and you can see pros and cons against it, some benefits for it, maybe some against it. That's a whole nother conversation we probably don't have time to get into. But then comes along television. And television brought a whole new generation of voices into American homes. Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, James Dobson, the PTL network, the Christian Broadcasting Network. You had Focus on the Family. And Robertson understood explicitly what was at stake. And he wrote that, whoever controls the media controls the interpretation of reality. So the televangelists that we had at this time, who probably remember these names very well, they didn't just broadcast Christianity, they built parallel institutions, television networks, direct mail operations, and political organizations. The moral majority wasn't a church. It was a media and essentially a mobilization machine in many ways. And so this era also gave us this time frame something called direct mail. I'm getting a lot of direct mail right now every day in my mailbox, thanks to our big elections coming up here in California. A lot of junk mail. That's direct mail, and one of the first precision targeted media technologies was direct mail, but and this was long before Facebook's micro targeting. The religious right was using this kind of demographic data to identify sympathetic voters and delivered tailored political messages directly to people's mailboxes. Um, Catherine Stewart's book, The Power Worshippers, documents how this data-driven approach, kind of analog data-driven approach, matured into sophisticated voter mobilization operations, merging the worlds of marketing and communications and data mining to identify and mobilize conservative Christian voters at scale. Now, obviously, the technology was cruder. The logic was, you could argue, identical to what the platforms essentially do today. So in each era, looking back now at history, the pattern was the same. A new medium emerges. The movement recognizes its potential before its opponents do. It builds institutions around it. You have networks and organizations, you have mailing lists, mobilization operations, and then it uses that medium to bypass the gatekeeping structures that might otherwise slow its spread. And that's things like the mainstream press, the regulatory bodies, the denominational accountability structures, the theological institutions. And then each time the medium amplifies the message. Right? Hopefully you can kind of see how that pattern works. And then each time the reach grows and the movement becomes more sophisticated in its use of the technology that is available to it. So that happens with every time. It happens with radio, then you see it happening with television, and then so on. And then where we are today with the internet and digital media. So again, each new medium amplified the movement, but something changes with the rise of algorithmic platforms. Something major changes, something very significant. And so where the radio carried the message and television carried the messenger, the algorithm does something categorically different. It doesn't simply distribute content. It learns what makes you afraid, right? What makes you angry. What makes you feel like your identity, your way of life is under threat. And then it feeds you more of it. It just gives it to you, and it's personalized and it's continuous. And you just click and you share, right? And you're riled up. And it's just largely invisible to you. You don't even realize what's happening. You're just in your little echo chamber and you're just getting more of it and more of it, more of it, and you're sharing it, right? So, and that is what's different. That's what's key. And that's what makes this moment unlike anything that has come before it in the past. And so to understand what the attention economy has done to American Christianity, it helps to look at some really concrete examples. And so for that, there's some really important work that we can turn to help us with this. Tim Alberta is probably one of the most significant. He's an evangelical Christian, and a senior staff writer at The Atlantic. His father was a beloved pastor, evangelical pastor in Michigan. And when his father died in 2019, Alberta was stunned by the messages he received from members of his father's congregation. Now, these weren't expressions of grief, but complaints that his father had never been political enough from the pulpit. And so these experiences sent Alberta on a years-long journey through American evangelicalism, talking to pastors and congregants and denominational leaders and prominent evangelical figures across the country. And the result was this book, The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory. I highly recommend it. And it's one of the most, I would say, one of the most important books written about what has happened to American Christianity in the age of social media and partisan politics. Alberta tells the story in that book that I think really captures better than any statistic of what's happening inside American evangelical life right now. He tells a story of David French, who is a conservative lawyer, an Iraq war veteran, and a prominent evangelical writer who became a target of the Christian right for his opposition to Donald Trump. And the harassment that French received was absolutely extraordinary. The Twitter trolls that flooded the internet with threats and fabricated sexual accusations against his wife. They photographed images of his adopted Ethiopian daughter inside a gas chamber. Fellow congregants at his church in Tennessee turned their backs when the Frenches, his family, when they walked into a room. One Sunday morning after church, an elder confronted David and his wife Nancy inside the sanctuary after worship service. And when the conversation turned heated, the elder looked at David and said, "You had better get your woman under control." That's kind of the abuse that they experienced. And so what they ended up doing was moving to a new church where they lived near Nashville to Franklin, Tennessee, and hoping to start over. And there, on one of the first Sundays in this new church there in Franklin, Tennessee, David stood at the communion table with a small group of congregants. And there, a man who he was sharing the cup with, drinking from the cup, set it down, and he looked over at French and told him right there at the communion table that he strongly disagreed with his political opinions at the communion table. And then he introduced himself, and at that moment, French recognized him instantly. This man was one of his most prolific online abusers. So, Alberta's conclusions in this book are absolutely sobering because Christians who had spent, the previous decade retreating ever deeper into echo chambers of conservative talk radio and things like Fox News and so on, were, and we should, and I'll pause here and say, when we talk about digital media, we certainly need to think about other forms of media too. And I don't have time to get into media like Fox News and so on, because that's very influential as well. But anyways, retreating to ever deeper into these echo chambers where every policy disagreement was treated like a proxy war for the soul of the nation. This formed kind of this, as he calls it, this new catechesis for believers, one that Christian leaders saw, but never took seriously enough until it was too late. And so what once seemed like this kind of heightened but not unhealthy political engagement turned out to be a toxic, paranoid form of thinking. And the scale of it really matters because long before the average churchgoer was addicted to things like Fox News, prime time, these same people were listening to 4 to 5 hours of fundamentalist profit charting conspiracy preachers on radio and television every single day for many, many years. And this is just a lot more of it now, and it is more explicitly political in its aims and more targeted and directed and focused. And so for Alberta, that's what he calls the new catechesis, the new teaching. It's not the church, it's not the pastor, even though some of these pastors are very, very much caught up in all this. It's not scripture or it's not sacrament or community. It's 4 to 5 hours a day of content engineered to provoke, to catastrophize, to confirm that the enemy is at the gates and that your political identity is your spiritual identity. So Alberta has also documented in specific cases of how the platforms function as actually recruiting tools as well. And he gives the example of Greg Locke, who is a pastor in Tennessee, who's built a $2.2 million followers on Facebook and described the platform explicitly himself as a recruiting tool for his movement. And he didn't just build that following through a theological depth or pastoral care. He built it by producing exactly the kind of content that the algorithm rewards. And he built it on outrage and a persecution narrative and apocalyptic urgency. So again, this isn't a fringe phenomena. What Alberta is describing is something happening in mainstream evangelical congregations across America. So the sophistication of the technology, the technological operation on the ground goes even further. Again, Catherine Stewart, who I mentioned earlier in her book, The Power Worshippers, documents the work of an organization called United in Purpose, which launched an initiative called Project 75, which is a massive data mining voter mobilization operation that merged the worlds of marketing, communications, and data to identify and mobilize conservative Christian voters. And so what they've done is have actually developed a tool called the Church Voter Lookup Tool, which allowed pastors to run their entire church database to determine the registration and voting percentage of their own congregations. So again, this isn't grassroots religion, what we're looking at here. Think about that. This is Silicon Valley level data operation deployed in the service of a political movement in a local church. And so then there's even, I would suggest even a more extreme edge here, which tells us something important about where the logic of these platforms leads when taken to its conclusion. Some of you are familiar with something called the New Apostolic Reformation, or the NAR. It's a loosely organized network of independent charismatic Christian leaders who believe they have a divine mandate to take dominion over the 7 spheres of society, which are government, education, media, arts, religion, family, and business. Now, if you heard many of the things that they value and support and believe in, you'd be like, wow, yes, those are amazing things. We should all be supportive of those things. But as Matthew Taylor points out in his book, The Violent Take It by Force, who documents this whole book is about the NAR. The NAR has constructed a deliberate, sophisticated, and extremely impressive parallel digital media ecosystem. And it is extremely effective. So just for example, consider this, a single data point, a prophecy-driven political commentary program called Flashpoint. Maybe some of you have heard of this. You can find it on YouTube, and they operate something called the Victory Channel. It has 56,000 views just in September 2020. But if you look back, so right, when it started, that's 2020, that's several years ago. And by January of 2021, everybody remembers what happened in January 2021, the month of the Capitol insurrection. It had gone from 56,000 views in September 2020, just a few months later. In January, it jumped to 32.4 million views. Think about that. From 56,000 views to 32.4 million views in 4 months. So that, I would not say, my friends, is organic growth, right? That is a platform doing exactly what it was designed to do. That's what these platforms are meant to do, and it was doing it effectively well. Now, who runs this? It is a gentleman by the name of Dutch Sheets, who is a self-proclaimed prophet, And he is connected with this. He's created a smartphone app called Give Him 15, right? And it's a great idea, right? You give God 15 minutes, and it's 15 minutes of daily spiritual reflection, but it oftentimes also has uh, 15 minutes of political reflection. And it's delivered directly to anyone who just logs on his app or on YouTube, to his followers. And what's great about it is, what's effective about it, going back to what we talked about earlier, just the way this conservative Christian media has worked, bypassing all these other forms of media, right? Bypasses television networks, bypasses denominations, it bypasses any institutional accountability whatsoever. It goes right directly to people, and it immediately began to draw on hundreds of thousands of views. He has Zoom prayer calls, and he's able to organize NAR leaders, like up to 1.1 million participants very quickly. Another person involved with this is someone by the name of Lance Wallnow, who broadcasts these impromptu prophetic commentary via Facebook Live from hotel rooms, wherever he is, reaching millions of followers who experienced it as a kind of unmediated divine revelation. And so for people who log on and listen to these guys, the platform feels very personal. It feels kind of like intimate encounter, but the intimacy is all engineered. And so what these men have done, what these leaders in the NAR are done, is brilliant and extraordinary, because they've understood what most churches do not understand, and that is that the platforms reward a very specific kind of content. Persecution narratives perform extraordinarily well. Apocalyptic framing, the sense that civilization itself is at stake, that God's people are under siege, generates intense engagement. Moral binaries, us versus them, good versus evil, these are precisely the content structures that algorithm amplifies most powerfully. And oftentimes there's a particular kind of patriarchy involved, there's a kind of xenophobia involved, and there's an underlining kind of white supremacy that is also involved in all this we should not ignore, that underlines all of this Christian nationalism. So this content doesn't stay in one place, and it moves, it gets shared, it gets clicked on and passed along, it gets liked, and it builds and it grows. And so a conspiracy theory or a piece of a prophetic political commentary might originate on a fringe site or an encrypted messaging app, but it gets picked up and repackaged by online influencers. It gets legitimized by partisan outlets, and eventually broadcast by prominent political and religious figures to millions of followers. And each amplification makes it more credible, and each share extends its reach. And so the feedback loop is self-reinforcing and largely invisible to those inside of it. That's the worrisome part of it. And the data then bears out where this leads. So, for example, Phil Grosky and Samuel Perry, in their book The Flag and the Cross, document a finding that I would stops me cold when I hear this. 73%, 73%, notice that number, of high-scoring Christian nationalists also affirm core QAnon beliefs. 73%. That's amazing. And I would suggest that is not coincidence, right? That is that's a radicalization pipeline, if you will. That the algorithm that recommends one kind of extreme content recommends another kind. So the platforms don't distinguish between a prophecy channel and a conspiracy channel, right? The technology doesn't differentiate that, because all it sees is just engagement. It just serves more and more and more of it. Click after click after click, like after like after like, share after share after share. That's how it works. Again, a couple more examples here is the work of Andrew Whitehead and Samuel Perry in their book, Taking America Back for God. They add a whole nother layer that I think that complicates this picture further. Through extensive survey data that they've done, Whitehead and Perry have found that Christian nationalism and actual religious practice regulate church attendance, prayer, scripture reading, and so on. These things often drive Americans in opposite directions. So high religious commitment correlates with greater concern for the poor, for refugees, for racial justice, and so on, taking the teachings of Jesus seriously. Where adherence to Christian nationalism seems to correlate with, again, xenophobia, white supremacy, authoritarianism, and hostility toward the marginalization and downplaying and not taking seriously the literal teachings of Jesus. So the movement bearing the name of Christ is, by data, pulling people away from the practices and values of historic Christianity. And the platforms have made that possible at scale. Now, the House Select Committee, interestingly enough, when investigating the January 6th incident, concluded that right-wing activists exploited mainstream and fringe platforms in tandem. You can go back and look at the report, and you'll see this, that they exploited mainstream and fringe platforms in tandem, mobilizing extremists on smaller sites while simultaneously amplifying conservative grievances on larger ones. So, in other words, the digital ecosystem that made January 6th possible wasn't just built in a day. It just didn't happen overnight. It was built over many, many years, platform by platform by platform, channel by channel, app by app, user by user. So, which brings us then, I think, to the question. I think that this evidence demands an answer. How does this actually work? What is it about these platforms that made all of this possible? And why are they so extraordinarily effective at it? And I'll try to get through this quickly here so we can wrap up. So how does this actually work? And how's this all come together? Well, I think we tend to think of Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube as social platforms and places where we connect with our friends, where we share our lives, where we watch content, we follow news and commentary, right? And this is how they present themselves. But that's not what they are, okay? They are advertising businesses. Their product is not connection. Their product is your attention. And their business model depends on capturing as much of it as possible and for as long as possible and selling access to it to the highest bidder. So someone who has documented this well, I have a major research project I'm working on right now, drawing on a lot of her work, is Shoshana Zuboff in her book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, who calls this the most significant economic shift of our time. And these platforms, she argues, extract vast amounts of behavioral data from every interaction, every click, every pause, every search, every reaction, and use it to build extraordinary detailed profiles of who you are, what you fear, what you desire, what will keep you scrolling. And the data is then used to serve you content and advertising with surgical precision. You are not the customer, you are the product. And you might think that, that you somehow have freedom whenever you're on the internet, whatever, but you would be shocked if you only knew how much big data knows about you. It's frightening. So, and here's the critical insight. The currency of this economy isn't information. It is not even entertainment. It is emotional intensity, because emotional intensity drives engagement, and engagement drives revenue. And so the platforms learned very quickly early on that certain emotions generate more engagement than others. And so joy performs moderately well, surprise performs well, but fear, anger, moral outrage, wow, these are the highest performing emotions in the attention economy. So content that triggers moral outrage spreads faster, travels further, keeps people on the platform longer than any other kind of content And this isn't speculation. This is what the internal research showed. This is what Facebook's own engineers documented in 2018. This is what they decided to ignore because they wanted to make more money. So again, remember the anger emoji weighed 5 times heavier than the like emoji, and that wasn't an accident. That was a designed decision. Now, consider what this means for religious and political content, right? Because Christian nationalism produces exactly the kind of content that algorithm is designed to amplify, right? Persecution narratives, existential threat, apocalyptic urgency, us versus them. These aren't incidental features of the movement. They're the content structures that perform best in the attention economy built on outrage. So the movement and the medium, they found each other, and the medium rewarded the movement for becoming even more extreme. Christian Fuchs, in his book Nationalism on the Internet, identifies several specific mechanisms, the content that users that feeds users, right? These are things like filter bubbles, right? Where the algorithm continuously feeds users content that conforms to their existing beliefs while filtering out dissenting views, creating information environments where the version of reality feels like only reality. Then there's bot amplification, where nationalist movements use automated accounts to artificially inflate the visibility of their content, simultaneously simulating grassroots support that doesn't exist. Another one is what Fuchs calls the psychological reward, where platforms provide users with a space to channel their frustrations, anxieties into online outrage, which delivers a genuine emotional reward. And then that ends up degrading perceived enemies online, which produces a surplus of pleasure and status that compensates for real-world alienation and loss. And then there is one more mechanism that I think deserves particular attention here, and it complicates the simple echo chamber story, where recent research has found that it is not simply the absence of opposing views that drives radicalization, where users do encounter belief challenging content on these platforms. The algorithm typically presents it in the context of an attack on their identity, which triggers not reconsideration, but defensive doubling down, where the platform's emotional logic transforms encounter with deference into confirmation of threat. So it's just so if you just simply expose people to diverse viewpoints on social media, what it does is it makes the polarization even worse, not better, because the platform frames disagreement as warfare. Tarleton Gillespie, in his book Custodians of the Internet, adds a dimension that is crucial for understanding why this has proven so difficult to address, where the platforms that are doing all this have simultaneously constructed elaborate legal and rhetorical defenses to deny responsibility for what they do. And the law gives platforms the right, but not the responsibility to moderate what flows through them. Community guidelines are presented as neutral community standards, where they disguise arbitrary corporate decisions as something else entirely. And they have used that asymmetry with extraordinary effectiveness. So in other words, the system doing this to us, right, has been specifically designed to avoid accountability for doing it. And that's one of the greatest challenges in bringing any change to all of this. Now, before we go any further, I want to return to something I said at the outset, because it's important enough to say again plainly here. What I have described this morning is not a story about Christianity. It is not a story necessarily about conservatism. It is a story about a business model. And that business model is ideologically indifferent. The attention economy doesn't have a theology. It doesn't have a political affiliation. It might look like that right now because the big tech is all lined up with whoever's in power right now, right? But it's all about them and how they can make more money and have more power and control. But in the end, the way the algorithms work, it doesn't have a political affiliation. It has a profit motive, right? And it will amplify whatever generates the most intense emotional response, regardless of where on the political or religious spectrum that content originates. Zachary Gershberg and Sean Illing, in their book, The Paradox of Democracy, make a sobering structural argument that helps explain why this is so difficult to address. Their thesis is that open communication environments, the very environments that democracy depends on, are permanently vulnerable to exploitation by demagoguery, distraction, and spectacle. And in an open media environment, whoever persuades by whatever means wins. And there is no built-in correction mechanism. There's no guarantee that truth outperforms falsehood, and that nuance outperforms outrage, and that careful argument outperforms emotional manipulation. Right? So the platforms, in other words, have simply made this permanent vulnerability operate at a scale and speed that no previous communication environment really can match. So what we see in Hindu nationalism in India, Bolsonarism in Brazil, Viktor Orban's illiberal Christianity democracy in Hungary, these movements look very different from one another theologically and politically, but they have all exploited the same platforms using the same logic: religious framing, persecution narrative, apocalyptic urgency, moral binary, xenophobia, because that is what the algorithm rewards everywhere, in every language, in every culture. The researchers Glees Matos Luz and Claudia Alvarez have studied the role of Facebook in Bolsonaro's rise in Brazil and found a playbook identical to what we see in American Christian nationalism. Different country, different language, different tradition, same platform, same results. So again, this is not only happening in evangelical Protestantism. Consider what's happening in Catholic Church this past Easter weekend. Religion News Service reported that a record number of new Catholics entered the church, and scholars raised alarms about what was driving it. Because young people, they're finding, are flooding into the Roman Catholic Church. Many of them are being formed, though, by are not being formed by like parish life or a particular Roman Catholic catechesis, but by Catholic influencer ministries online on TikTok and Instagram. Now, people say, oh, that's great. More people will come into the church. Right? Why not? But one Catholic scholar writing about this describes these ministries in striking terms. What they do is they feed no one, they clothe no one, they shelter no one, but they command enormous audiences and pour their resources into amplifying versions of Catholicism that are, in his words, unfamiliar to the church itself. And a global Catholic television network has platformed figures like Archbishop Vignano and Steve Bannon, whose views on the papacy and the direction of the church are at sharp odds with official Catholic teaching. And on the more extreme end of figures who are extremely popular are people like Nick Fuentes, who describes himself as a white nationalist who embraces what he calls Catholic fascism, and who have built a massive online following, feeding a broader Catholic manosphere that promotes a toxic and distorted masculinity wrapped in the language of traditional faith. The institutional church is watching people arrive at its doors already formed by influencers, by algorithms, and by an online ecosystem it did not create and does not control. So this is not just a Protestant problem. This is not just an American problem. This is not just a conservative problem. It is a platform problem. And it is happening to every tradition, every country, every side of every theological, political divide. And that logic operates on all of us. And I want to say that directly to all of us here today. It operates on progressives and conservatives, on religious and secular, on those who consider themselves well-informed and those who don't. None of us are exempt. The information environment we all inhabit, the one we check before we get out of bed in the morning, the one we scroll through the end of the day, was built to make us angry, to make us afraid, and certain that people on the other side of whatever divide matters most to us are a threat to everything we hold dear. So Christian nationalism is the sharpest American case of what this produces as most extreme, but it is just a case study of something that is happening to all of us in ways that we are only just beginning to understand. So I want to close with a which I think is the most important and most underappreciated dimension of this entire story. And it's one I think most directly relevant to us as a community of faith. And I think we have been talking about the platforms due to politics, but what do they do to us as persons, right? I think this is really important to think about. And so to answer that question, we need to go back to a foundational assumption that most of us carry without, I think, oftentimes examining it enough. And that assumption that we have the assumption that we are rational thinking creatures, right? That's the Enlightenment at play there, right? So that we are a core, that we're rational agents who gather information, we weigh it carefully, and we arrive at considered conclusions. That's nice. That's very nice to think that we operate that way. And that if we just get the right information to people, that they will think clearly and that they will just choose wisely and make the right decisions. I think that our church has operated that way for quite some time, right? But this assumption, right, again, has deep roots in Western philosophy, going back to Descartes and others. And so that's the idea again that the human person is fundamentally a mind, a thinking thing that relates to the world, primarily through reason, cognition, and so on. Martin Heidegger, though, in some ways challenged this picture at its foundation. Again, we are not, I think, Heidegger. Again, I'm not going to go deep in the weeds on Heidegger, nor do I have the ability to do that. But I think Heidegger argued that minds that happen to have we are not minds that happen to have bodies, right? We are beings who are always already embedded in a world. We are shaped by practices, by habits, by moods, and relationships that precede and run deeper than any conscious reflection that we do. So our primary mode of engaging reality is not thinking about it, but dwelling in it, moving through it, caring about it. So we understand things not by theorizing about them necessarily, but by living with them, right? So we are formed at level that precedes conscious belief, but by what we repeatedly do and experience. Now, drawing on Heidegger is the Christian philosopher James K. Smith. He's a philosopher theologian who takes this insight and translates it into the language of Christian formation. And so in his really important work in Desiring the Kingdom, Smith argues that we are not primarily thinking creatures, but we are desiring liturgical animals. And in other words, that we are shaped by what we repeatedly do. So by the practices that we inhabit, by the rituals that we perform, consciously or not. So our desires, our loyalties, our deepest sense of who we are and what we love. So these are shaped not primarily by what we think, but what we do day after day by the rhythms of ordinary life. So again, this isn't a new idea in Christian tradition. This is very ancient, and it's at the heart of why the church has always, I think, insisted on gathered worship, on scripture reading, on prayer, on communion, on Sabbath. That these aren't merely information delivery systems, right? That they are formational practices. And it's sad to me that they've gotten kind of crisscrossed and somehow they become these like legal things that somehow we do to earn our salvation, right? Or to make somehow please God or whatever. But really at the heart, there are these formational things that we do that they shape us into the kind of people we become over time. And at a deeper level, at a level deeper than just conscious belief, right? So let's now take that and consider what that means in the age of the attention economy, right? So if you think about it, the average American spends between 4 and 7 hours per day on digital platforms. How much time do you spend a day on digital platforms, right? 4 to 7 hours a day of scrolling, reacting, sharing, consuming. And with each interaction, training the algorithm to deliver more of what produced the strongest emotional response, right? Training it to what to feed you. This isn't a neutral activity then, right? It is, in a sense, it is formational. It is a form of worship. It is liturgical. And it is producing a kind of person who is, right, could be anxious, depending on what you're looking at, who is outraged, who is tribal, who is certain, and increasingly unable to encounter difference without experiencing it as a threat, who is increasingly in a particular kind of echo chamber, who only ever hears one particular line of thought, one particular kind of view, who is carefully curating what they want to see and what they want to hear. They only see the kind of news that they want to read. They only are with the kind of friends and the kind of circle of people, right? That is a liturgical formational experience, and it is producing a kind of person, right? Right. And so this formation is happening at exactly the level Heidegger identified below conscious reflection, below theological conviction, and a level of habit, mood, and desire, right? Where people are not reasoning their way into Christian nationalism, they are being formed into it by their feeds, by their algorithms, by the 4 to 7 hours a day they spend in an information environment specifically engineered to make them afraid and angry and certain that they're under siege, that they're under threat, that their way of life is gone. Marshall McLuhan warned us decades ago that the medium is the message, that the form of a communication technology shapes human consciousness independently of whatever content flows through it. And then Jacques Ellul, not too long after, warned us that that propaganda is not primarily about lies. It is about the structural conditioning of a person to serve the needs of a technological society. Both of them, writing before the internet existed, were describing with remarkable precision what the attention economy is doing to us today. And I would suggest that the church has largely missed this, not because its leaders are foolish or malicious, but because the platforms presented themselves as neutral tools. And this is where my area of research is in writing right now about how the church is complacent in this, because the church loves new technology, loves to be involved with this, right? On the cutting edge. But in doing that, the church becomes complacent in its use of technology, right? Because there's new ways of reaching people, new ways to stay connected, new ways to share the gospel. What the church did not reckon with, though, is that these tools are not neutral, that they are formational, and that they are forming our people every hour, every day in directions that the church has no awareness and no answer to. And so Tim Alberta, without using the language of formation, in his book, is making a formation argument when he describes the alternative media ecosystem as a new catechesis. He is saying that something is discipling people more effectively than the church is, and that something is the algorithm. And so in conclusion, if these platforms are forming us at a level we are often not aware of, it would seem the church's traditional tools of formation may not be sufficient on their own. Worship and preaching, community and service, these matter enormously. We really do believe these. I believe this. But they seem to be struggling to compete every day with 4 to 7 hours of algorithmic formation that is better resourced, more personalized, more emotionally sophisticated than anything it would seem the church has to offer right now. And I don't know what the answer to that looks like, but I suspect it looks different in different communities. But I am convinced that communities of faith that don't reckon seriously with this question, Christian leaders and that don't reckon with this, will find themselves in a generation looking at their people and not quite recognizing, maybe already, what they have become. So thank you very much. I know this is a lot and a long time, so I appreciate your attention. Looking forward to our conversations here.
Wow, I think you've kind of terrified us. Um, yeah, I've got several hands up already. I will start by just asking a pretty simple question. I mean, obviously, this is true. The first thing I thought of is, yeah, my internet knows that I'm a liberal, and they feed me all liberal stuff. They feed me social justice. They feed me anti-Trump. They feed me all of that stuff. So I know it's true. I never get anything different than that. However, my question is, if we're actually in a competing ecosystem, is there meaningful competition on the other side to counter what I think is an enormously effective MAGA, Christian right, evangelical um, machine, or is it, or do they have all the tools and all the power?
That's a great question, Lauren. And I think that that is the first, that's the first response, I think, to all this is to kind of counteract it with the same approach. I mean, I certainly see, if we're just going to look at this politically, I certainly see the left, if you want to use the language politically left, I see many of them some particular leaders trying to take the Donald Trump approach, to kind of use his tactics, their approach. But it seems to me historically that the left, the progressives, have never been able to organize themselves as effectively as the right has. It's just maybe somebody wants to challenge that particular view I have, but it just seems to me that for whatever
Mm.
reason, historically, politically, that conservatives, the right, financially, organizationally, politically, that's just always seemed to be the case that they're the right for whatever reasons. Maybe there's something about the political the right's ideology, the way that they can get around. I mean, the way it works, at least in America, it seems to me that that's the case. Maybe there's some historians here that can offer some better perspective on that, but that has how it seems, at least anecdotally for me looking at it.
Yeah,
I mean, you can
yeah.
see that in the church as well. You look at how well like some of the parachurch organizations that lean right, they're much larger, much well organized financially than anything on the left is in the church, and it just always has seemed to be that way.
I think I,
That
I
yeah,
think liberals tend to be sort of equivocal about things.
yeah.
Maybe it's this, maybe it's that.
Hmm.
Conservatives tend to be pretty opinionated. They come down on
But
the
yeah, and
side.
by my second but and I thought a lot about that, but then um politically it would seem to make sense that you'd want to go that direction to try to counteract all that. But
Mhm.
just in terms of as a but I don't know if that is for me in terms of my soul as a human being, do I want to do that?
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know,
Do I want to use those same tools?
yeah, that's what I ask myself.
Yeah.
do I want to get caught up in that same kind of, do I want to use the algorithm the same way? I mean, and they do. I mean, I think that they just can't do it as effectively well. I mean, that's my point earlier is that this doesn't, the left tries to use the algorithms just as effectively as the right does, and people get people on the left get just as riled up and get outraged just as much as the people on the right do. They're just not they just for whatever reason it just doesn't stick as much, obviously.
Right. And I mean, I think those of us who call ourselves liberals or progressives, we tend to take an attitude of, yeah, let me question this too.
Yeah.
Here's another thing is coming my way. Let me question it. And but
Hmm.
let's go to David. David, are you in British Columbia still?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, David. Join the conversation.
Okay. I I had one question, but I think you got to it. I appreciate you mentioning Elol. I've been engaging with him. I was gonna say, I hope you're submitting a proposal to the Society of Adventist Philosophers for the fall. This is the
Oh,
topic.
no, I appreciate it. I had already made a proposal to ASRS, which on this topic actually kind of directly. It's more
Okay.
on the topic I was talking about with the church's complacency in surveillance capitalism, and I got accepted. And then I was like, oh, I should have done so. I guess I could still submit something. Maybe I should.
Yeah. Hopefully I'll see
Thank
you
you.
there.
Yeah. Are
But
you going
yeah,
to
my
be there?
question, I'm not going to be there, but I'll be
Oh,
watching from
oh, okay,
online and
okay, yeah,
participating, hopefully
yeah,
presenting.
okay.
Um, I'm interested. You talk about the church's complacency. I wonder if you've thought all about the church's complicity. I mean, I grew up in Adventism in the 80s and 90s, and there was this thing about, HMS Richards like was a pathbreaker in radio broadcasting. And then we did the Net series, and they talked about, they had to develop new technology so we could do the Net series. And I think it's easy to sit back and say, well, Adventism is separate from all this, and yet it seems to me Adventism has in many ways promoted and advanced this very way of being in the world as technique.
Yes. Yeah. David, you're so right. Thank you. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I guess, yes, it is complicity. Yeah, exactly. And I guess in some ways I am saying that exact thing. Yeah, thank you. It
Mm.
is complicity. Complicity. Yeah, for sure. I love how you say as technique. That is such the Adventist approach. It's always about the technique. I love it.
Yeah. Well, and
It's
partly, I mean, I'm thinking of Elul here, where he talks about, we live in a society
oh yeah.
dominated by technique,
Yep. Technique
which
is the
shapes,
answer to everything.
yeah. And so then the question becomes, how do we think out of this? Which,
It, yeah.
uh,
It,
yeah.
it's so difficult for us. We've drank from that water for so long. I think it's sort of the Western society to get out of that is so challenging. What are your thoughts on how way out of that? I'm curious what you think.
I think a lot in terms of local community practice. I mean,
Hmm.
I engage with a lot of people and they're looking for meaningful connection. They're looking
Yes.
for meaningful community. I've seen that, and this is something I think Adventism is losing as we've
Yep.
shifted towards online, as we promoted independent ministries that are basically doing the same thing. We've forgotten about the value of coming together and being with people and
Going
all the
analog.
messiness of that and
Hmm.
practicing. Um, so I spend a lot of time in martial arts communities, and there are problems in the community, but there are also communities that are doing really amazing things. And this is why people come.
Yep.
We want to be with people who are growing and value each other and thinking deeply about life in the world.
Wow, I love it. I agree. I mean, it's going, like I said, it's going analog, I think, more as much as
Mhm.
we can in small communities, small places, for sure. Yeah.
David and Jeff, have you noticed that one of the things that I find kind of problematic is that if you bring up anything about this, even if it's clearly a religious issue in an Adventist church, a lot of people will say, Ellen White said we shouldn't talk about politics, and they'll include in that anything that a politician has said something about. He now has control of that topic. It's now become political. We can't talk about it, even if it's religious. We
Yep.
can't talk about it. Even if Jesus talked about it, we can no longer talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't pastored for over 10 years now. It's been a long time, but I mean, even back when I was pastoring, I certainly experienced that. And I know it's gotten more intense. And I've heard from other pastors that they certainly have experienced like anytime they preach anything from the Gospels at all, and if there's any, allusion at all to anything that Jesus said that might have political consequences, people say, "Oh, that was too political." So
Yeah,
yeah, I know that that's something that yeah.
yeah. George, it's your turn.
Yes, thank you so much for this presentation. I can
Thank
thank you
you.
enough for that because it's so much needed among any religious denomination of people in general. Because the tools that you presented, they are castrating people's ability to think clearly, objectively, with knowledge, and they are becoming victims of all those tools. And this has to be, fought, and you are doing it. So I really appreciate that. And encourage you to keep doing this more and more.
Thank you, George.
When you mentioned the Catholic fascism, in my mind immediately popped to another expression, the Adventist fascism. A few months ago, someone, I don't recall who was it, presented at the Faith and Reason Sabbath School at Sligo a survey. According to a survey, 68% of Adventists MAGA or were MAGA at the time of the election. Well, so they are supporting fascism right there. And all those people must accept that they are part of the Adventist fascism. And this is inconceivable in a religion movement, especially among the remnants and all that. So look, keep talking, because I hope that your talk and from many others will probably hopefully trigger a aha moment in the Adventist Church, and the Adventist Church will start helping their members to understand what you are explaining and stop being victims of this strategy that does not come from heaven. That I believe so. Thank you again.
Thank you, George. I appreciate that. Yes, and I agree with you. And one thing I intentionally did not. Well, I only had a 10-minute 12-minute version of this that I gave at the symposium that we had here at Loma Linda University. But when I was but I have intentionally left out directly talking about Adventists, our own Adventist people in this. But it was in my back of my mind the whole time, because I am highly concerned about how this has influenced so many Adventists, of our brothers and sisters. And I've talked to other Adventist pastors, and I've experienced it with my own family, who have been influenced by this, and many friends whose family have been influenced by this, and people that I know. And even here at University Church, when I talked to our senior pastor, Randy Roberts, and his experience he did a masterful job recently at doing a sermon series on how to handle, dealing with politics and disagreeing with people. And it was a beautiful sermon series. And I've never heard anyone talk so carefully and dealing with these kind of issues. But it is a real problem, and it's amazing to me. Adventists are not immune to the things I was talking about here. We are not immune to it and being influenced by these political algorithms, and especially on the right. And people have been influenced by all this stuff. People are listening to the new Reformation, the new Apostolic Reformation. They're listening to these videos, they're listening to these YouTube channels. They're being influenced by all these same people. They're caught up in QAnon. They're caught up in these conspiracy theories. I wouldn't, don't be surprised you walk into some Adventist church someplace and they're running around with this stuff and talking about it. So I don't have any hard data on it. I just anecdotal experience talking to people, and I'm sure everybody here has stories they could tell.
Yeah, it's not going to happen, but I think that the two books that you mentioned, at least two, Alberta's book,
yes,
and the other one about the NAR, I read those books recently.
Yeah.
And those books should be studied in Sabbath school.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I believe that I think you all know Michael Campbell. You probably had him on here, Lauren, I would think.
We have, yeah.
So Michael, I know that Michael is organizing for the fall sometime. You could talk to him and find out when this is. But Michael is having another Christian nationalism conference in the fall at Union Adventist University in Lincoln. And I believe that they've invited Tim Alberta to be one of their speakers.
Oh.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you, George. Good question. Nick, glad to have you on. Would you join the conversation?
I appreciate it. And Lauren, I got to tell you, this is an incredible dialogue. It is so encouraging to hear this kind of conversation. I'm so glad I was able to make it today.
Well, thank you, Nick. Appreciate that.
Dr. Gang, your research and your work is incredible. I've been an Adventist pastor for 45 years, but for 20 of those years.
Congratulations. That's a good run.
Yeah, and I've got the wounds to prove it. But for 20 of those years, I was also the evening drive host of a talk radio station in the fifth largest media market in the country.
Wow.
In the 90s, I don't know if you remember it, with the rise of people like Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity and others, the liberal side created something called Air America. The idea being we needed to compete with these individuals who were using radio as a truncheon. But Air America failed because people who are liberal and people who have compassion don't like using the tools that for want of a better term, the enemies of justice might use. So Air America failed. What I wanted to ask you is, how do we then fight against those who are adversaries of justice and peace and compassion without becoming the very thing that we're trying to fight against? I mean, how do we use these tools without becoming victims of what these tools create? You know, that the old saying, be careful, those of you who fight monsters, lest you become one. How do we do it?
Yeah. Wow. Well, first of all, back to that, back to what Lauren was initial question or initial thought. You know, I think, Nick, that you have that's a great insight about Near America. That says a lot there, because yeah, that's an insight on why the left or whatever progressives just always struggle to try to compete with the power of the right, you know. I don't have an easy answer. All I can know is, you know, you can help me out, because I'm probably going to slaughter this beautiful quote from Martin Luther King Jr., right? That the arc of justice bend. What's the bend of?
The arc of
How's the quote?
justice is long, but it bends towards justice.
Yes, that's all I can hope for. You know, and I mean, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to keep trying every which way I can to fight for justice and stand for the right, and have moral courage and do and stand for the marginalized and the people, you know, and do the right thing. And but maybe that's just the way the arc of the universe works, is that that we're always going to get, you know, maybe we're not, maybe that's just the way it is, that we're not meant to always be the ones on the top.
We have to fight this thing. I
Right. I'm not
sense,
saying we don't fight,
yeah,
but
I
maybe
sense
it's,
that the way was mentioned earlier, and that is
yeah.
by creating resonant, responsive
Yes.
community where,
Yeah, exactly. No,
yeah,
yes. Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
mean, I
Look,
mean,
I'm looking. I don't know if you have a book out there, but I will rush to get it as soon as the sun sets.
oh, maybe someday. Well, I think what I'm working on right now will become a book someday, I hope, about the church, um, and thanks to, was it David Bennett, I think? Was it David who I was
Yeah,
talking to? Yeah,
David,
David. Yeah, and he reminded me. Yes, actually, what I am writing about is the church's complicity in surveillance capitalism. I hope that will become a book one day. But yeah, but thank you. I appreciate that, and thanks for your thoughts. Yeah,
Thank you, sir. Appreciate
yeah,
your contribution. Thank
yeah.
you.
Thank you,
actually David Barrett. I'm sorry, David, didn't mean
David
to
Barrett.
slaughter
Okay,
your
Barrett.
name, you
Yeah.
know. And hey, by the way, some of you I know always kind of wait to the last minute to raise your hand. Raise them now. Get in on the conversation now and get started. Bjorn?
Great. All right, good. I'm unmuted. Thank you very much, Dr. Gang. This was, yeah,
Thanks,
we
Bjorn.
keep having really good ATSSs, and I really, really enjoyed this one. I thought it was extremely relevant to the media landscape today. So I had a
Thank you,
couple
Bjorn.
comments. First of all, I totally agree with what you're saying about the need to the formation experience in communal worship where you're actually there with people. And I 100% agree that we need to do better and better in that respect, to create spaces where we can meet together and actually go through worship together. I think there's something vital about that. So I was very much in agreement there. Where I was less in agreement, and respectfully, is this idea that progressives have a hard time communicating or organizing effectively and getting their message across. I mean, I feel like whenever the other side, so to speak, is doing a much better job, at communicating, it's easy to feel, oh, our side is, cursed, it's lost, it's
Hmm.
we can't compete, according to these new terms. It's kind of like when Obama was having his moment in 2008. I remember speaking to a conservative friend of mine, and he admitted, he was like, "Yeah, I kind of wish we had an Obama." Because he was able to campaign, he was able to organize, he was able to simplify a message. He used the, well, from primitive social media they had at the time, and his message was clearer, more compelling, more strident, more humorous, more all of that than anything the right wing was coming up with. Right? He
Mm.
absolutely nailed it. So I think the reason that liberals are floundering and just doing a horrible job and lost the last election, for example, in the U.S., even though I'm not American, is that the message is muddled. There's been lazy, elitist thinking that doesn't want to get into the mud and use social media for its positive potential. It's like, oh well, that stuff is for low level influencers or whatever. We don't want to get into that stuff, and
Mm.
because we're taking such a sort of elitist and hands-off view, we don't learn essential tools that allow for really, really strong communication. And I think that is unforgivable, and
Mm.
that is why essential messages are not coming across. Like, is it a perfect means of communication? Of course not, but nothing is. And if we ignore it and kind of wash our hands or intellectualize the whole thing, we're going to continue losing. So I say, get better at the tools.
Hmm. Yeah. Thanks, Bjorn. That's really good thoughts. Yeah. I,
Thank you.
Thank you, Bjorn. Yeah, very good. Ed, I'm going to make you able to talk here. There you go.
Thank you. I disagree with Bjorn. I didn't really enjoy this presentation. It was very informative, but also stirred up, feelings of concern.
mhm.
It's only in that sense that I didn't enjoy it. It was a great presentation.
Yeah. Fair.
Um, I wrote down that when you said the church has missed this, the whole thing that you presented, and the church has missed it.
Hmm.
Um, I'm afraid our church officially is a one-trick pony. Uh, the tone at the top says that the shouting the three angels' messages is the thing.
Hmm.
And I'm not sure that's true personally. The three angels' messages sounds just like more conspiracy theory, actually. Um, and my mind quickly turns in any situation to what are the strategic issues at hand. And what is the church's strategy in this case? And I have to feel like the answer is not in traditional Adventism. But I do think there is a market opportunity for the church, if we can put it in business terms. And that is that there are many, many people out there who are very unhappy with the trends that you have pointed out. They just don't seem to have the voice that the other side does. And so I think there is a niche market opportunity both inside and outside of the Adventist church. On the inside, probably it's the more progressive element of the church who would counter these trends in some way
Hmm.
than the traditional side of the church. And so I believe there's probably an opportunity to rally that element of our church in some way. Uh, Outside the church, it's these many, many people who don't agree with what's happening, and they're not Adventists. There are many people who are unhappy with the trends that they're seeing. Anytime there's an article that pops up in the New York Times about Christian nationalism, there's an outpouring of opposition in commentary on the New York Times webpage. Um, and so, how would we reach that segment of the population that does not cater or cotton to Christian nationalism, who would rally around a different flag or find us to be interesting in these dynamics? May not be making myself very clear, but I think we probably are not going to counter this dominant presence of Christian nationalism. Maybe we should be after that market segment that does not follow Christian nationalism. That might be a sympathetic audience for us if we could find a way. And maybe David Barrett's idea of going local is a good one,
Yeah.
but I'd be interested in your thoughts of how we target that segment that is not taken in by Christian nationalism.
Yeah, that's a great question, Ed. I agree. Couple thoughts here. And forgive me if I go in some directions maybe you weren't necessarily thinking. I mean, the first thing you said something about the third angel's message, the three angels' message, excuse me. And as I was working on putting this material together, and I and thinking about some of the approaches that, the algorithm feeds into and gets people, engaged with these things, and some of these things are conspiracy theories, right? And you do see that trend in among a lot of Adventists that the way sometimes the three angels message is this is being recorded, so I just want to say I'm not criticizing the three angels message at all. I'm just saying I'm criticizing the way the three angels message is oftentimes presented. Okay, let's just separate those two things. So we can get into that. We can get into debate about the three angels message somewhere else, but oftentimes three angels message you oftentimes see it comes along with a whole package of other things. And number one, and you remember what I said at the end about Marshall McLuhan, right? The medium is the message, and oftentimes the medium is more about the medium is more the message than it is actually a three angels message, and the medium comes with a whole lot of other things. And I think the medium is more concerning to me oftentimes than the actual message of the three angels. Does that make sense? So I think that comes oftentimes with a whole lot of other conspiracy theories and kind of wild, crazy ideas that some of our televangelists and our evangelists, whatever, kind of bring along with them. And it seems to me to feed into a particular type of mindset that attracts that same kind of algorithm seems to attract as well. So that's concerning to me. And then, yeah, I think you make a really interesting point about how are we going to reach. Yeah, there's a lot. I think there's a lot of people that are concerned in about the same things about like you say in the New York Times, wherever people hear about Christian nationalism, they make comments. They're concerned. They don't. How are we going to reach those people? I think one of the people. I think that's the issue for me is the center, like the center right now, the political center. They don't like either of these extremes that are going on right now, right or left extremes, and it seems everything moves toward one of these extremes. And if you can just get the center, I mean, I think even in the last political election, if you could have gotten more of the center, I don't know, you would have seen a different outcome. But I don't know if we're willing to meet the needs of the center more, talk to the center.
I think the three angels message is a slug line and a slogan. I'd venture to say that 4 out of 5 Adventists couldn't explain them, and couldn't explain why, other than it has something to do with Jesus coming again. Couldn't explain the implications, the exclusivism, everything that's implied in it. Gina, your turn.
Thanks, Lauren. And honestly, Ed kind of mentioned some of the things I was going to say. I thought the presentation was really great. And just thinking about, I mean, I did my own little notes here, and I'm probably not getting this accurate. But when you talked about the algorithms featuring fear, apocalyptic messaging, conspiracy theories, moral outrage, us versus them. It just kind of sounded like the Adventist message to me. And I guess I wondered, is there something that the Adventist Church can learn from this? I mean, when I see this in the context of Christian nationalism as something very unattractive, can the church learn a lesson from that and say, maybe this is not a very positive approach for evangelism, positive approach for spreading the gospel? It seems like there's something to be learned here. I mean, to me, Facebook just seemed like an Adventist flip chart on steroids.
Yeah.
Maybe they just do it better than we do, and that's what's troubling. But I think it's very interesting what you're pointing out here.
Thank you, Gina. Yeah, this is kind of what I was getting at a little bit with what, kind of jumping off of what Ed's point about the 300's message. I agree. And I'm on Facebook. I haven't been on there as much as I used to be. I've kind of really, but in early days I was on quite a bit. And I mean, I know I have a lot of, people that I know on there, and I've seen a lot of people all over the place in different views. But yeah, I've seen people who post things about Adventist views and kind of wild things, and they do, they're getting fed by the algorithm just as much with their Adventist views. The algorithm doesn't care what your religious beliefs are. It doesn't care if you're Adventist or you're Catholic or you're, and so if you're posting kind of crazy Adventist conspiracy theories about stuff, it'll start feeding that to you too.
I
And
just wonder if you think this as well. It seems that the more conservative, conspiracy theory oriented the Adventist message gets, the more okay the church is with it. And the more questioning, thought-provoking, it's shut down by the church. I mean, I'm more concerned that people who lean extremely right and conservative kind of have a free access to the pulpit, the media, the television, the radio, not so much on the progressive side. What do you think about that?
Well, it's hard to deny what you see. Yeah.
I'm not that close to it, but that's
No, I mean,
what I
it's
see
hard to
from a
deny. I mean,
distance.
it's hard to, I mean, I can't deny what what do you see? You're right. That's what I see too. And that's what it appears to me. Yeah. And I certainly see that in other countries as well, outside the United States for sure. It would seem it certainly seems to me that there is a correlation between that form of Adventism and the particular political view as well. Like, I mean, I'm not saying that's not, there are certainly, I know some people that are quite progressive liberally, but also probably line up with MAGA, maybe more politically, maybe more for financial reasons, right? They compartmentalize things, but I've seen a lot of Adventists that probably maybe more theologically conservative and line up with MAGA, but it's more for more social reasons. I don't know, but
thank you, Gene. It's nice to have you and Dan back on the continent again after your long trip. Dan, it's your turn.
Yeah, thanks. I did appreciate this presentation. I'm kind of been a political observer without always being involved in the process. And the MAGA people, I have to say, traditionally, I've been a conservative, a fiscal conservative, not necessarily religious in any sense. The Adventist church I came to very late in life, and we raised our kids in it. And I do have an appreciation for good things about the church, the educational system, the healthcare message. But I was never indoctrinated as a youth into kind of the policies and the E.G. White items. But I am interested in the Christian nationalism. And so your talk went far beyond that, which was fascinating to me because I didn't really I've sat back and watched what has happened on the far right in the Christian nationalist movement, and not worried about it too much. But the message and the form of the message is very interesting to me. So I was glad of your presentation. But as a practical matter, because I have kind of a background as a conservative, nowadays I get all kinds of emails and junk mail through the post office advocating far right programs, MAGA style programs. And I'm throwing stuff away all the time and deleting emails as a practical matter. And it just makes me think that I should do more than just dump these things out. I should take a proactive stance in some sense to disagree with these things. But do you have a practical advice for those who are getting bombarded by information we really don't want and we're not going to listen to? That's the question.
Well, I mean, I'm getting, it's funny that Dan, that you say that. First of all, I have a conservative background too. Actually, I was raised in a Republican home, and somebody mentioned Rush Limbaugh earlier, and when I was in college, I was part of the Young Republicans at Southern, and I used to listen to Rush Limbaugh faithfully, but kind of changed my views of things over the years. So I'm kind of, but it's funny. I get bombarded by, I'm not going to say who, but I gave money once to a political cause, and they got my email, and I am just inundated by, I mean, every day it's the worst junk mail of all. It's political junk mail. It's just horrible. I wish I could. I have the same question you have. I just can't stop it. They're the worst. They're the worst junk mail of anybody. So I guess maybe, and it's all from one political persuasion. So maybe I would like to get a little bit, maybe of another persuasion, just get to see some other views. Maybe you could do that. Maybe you could sign up for another extreme to kind of, so you don't get one mix. I don't know.
I've kind of wanted to have everything stop, but
I know. I wish
makes
know.
me think I should take some kind of action. So.
I did do several years ago. I went through I did a bunch of research on how to stop, junk mail and stuff. And it did help. I don't get it, but I can't stop the political junk mail, which is interesting. That's the one I can't stop. So Eastern California.
Thanks
But
for that. I appreciate it.
I don't know how to, I wish there was a way that I knew how to slow that down. I do know that I have some filters set on my email. If you're getting email, I do that so that I can quickly, like a spam folder thing set up, so I can quickly delete it. I have done that. So it does save me a little bit of time, but it doesn't completely solve it. By the way, I like all your horn collection there. I used to play the trumpet.
Dan is a very good trumpet player.
That I can see. That was my guess.
He was he was one of my parishioners out in California, and I love Dan and Gina. In fact, Gina made me think of something what she said about the Adventist Church. If you really consider it, Seventh-day Adventists were founded on conspiracies.
Yeah.
And it makes accepting conspiracies for some, I think, rather easy.
Yeah.
Through the years, the people who have responded to, let's say, the evangelistic series that features the beasts or the horror of Babylon or whatever those have tended to be people who liked that more than they liked Jesus loving us and accepting us, and even more than they liked the Sabbath or the expectation of Jesus coming. It's that whole milieu of conspiracies that brings them in. Ray, your turn.
Although I didn't hear a lot in your talk about this particular idea, but it seems like this mixture of religion and politics that we call Christian nationalism is really about control of people, mind and thought. And control, it seems like, has always been the issue with religion. So politics, I see it as simply looked at what religion has generally done over time and adopted some of those ideas and methods and refined them even better as simply as a method of control of people. I mean, if we stop and think it, organized religion, I hate to say that, is really about control of a group of people. You want to guide them, you want to tell them what to think, how to act, what to do, what's proper and improper. So we're seeing that today with this so-called Christian nationalism, which is just, to me, is another control method, refined and improved. Am I wrong in thinking that way?
Um, I mean, I guess maybe so you're saying religion is just a form of controlling people? Is that what I hear you? Did I understand you?
Yes.
Um, I guess maybe that makes me a little uncomfortable. I guess maybe I would say an unhealthy forms of religion. If that, yeah, would be if that's how it's if you think of it that way, it would be a unhealthy like forms. It's just if that's what the people who are running or the leaders of the religion or that's what their goal is, then that's a an unhealthy form of religion. Yeah.
Well, I I don't think it's purposeful
Yeah.
in some matters, but yeah, I guess I would have to say that seems to be what is actually happening,
Yeah.
whether it's on purpose or not.
Okay. Hmm.
Well, Ray, I've been trying to
Well, Marx
hypnotize
Marx
you
would
to
certainly agree with you.
Pardon?
I said Marx would agree with you.
Karl Marx.
Karl
Yeah.
Marx. I guess I'd have to give that some thought if that's um so is that then is that a is that a negative thing then or is that positive? Or can it be
I see it as misapplication.
misapplication? Okay.
Misapplication. It just my own personal belief.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's misapplication. I can find nothing in the book that religion or Christianity is based upon, looking
Hmm.
at the words of Christ and what he did, that would ever go that way. It seemed like everything that was written or claimed to have been written by him or said by him or whatever is the exact opposite.
Okay.
And so religion has tried to control Christ and say this is what he is or whatever, rather than saying, make your decisions here yourself. In other words, use your mind. Well, there's a bit of mind control in there. Anyway, that's enough.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a lot to think about.
Well, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Ray. I've been trying to control you through the screen all this time, trying to get a really big donation for Adventist today, and I haven't succeeded yet. I mean, like $100,000 or something. So I don't know that I'm that good at control. Yeah, Arthur.
Yes, thank you, Lauren. I suspect that you may no longer. I haven't seen you in person for several decades, Lauren. I think you may be an
That's
AI
true.
generated algorithm because
Hmm.
this presentation is exactly what an algorithm would have chosen for a topic for this group, right?
There you go.
So,
I'm you caught me out.
yep, yep.
I'm trying to manipulate you.
Yes, I believe that. Speaking of manipulation, um, it's almost funny, but it isn't, that a church which has for its entire existence used as its recruiting tool conspiracies, proof text methods, and an exalted view of one of its founders, is then bemoans the fact that it's people who they raised to be that way is susceptible to credulity and conspiracy theories. It is designed that way. It's like there was an algorithm that brought us all into that way of thinking, and then as I say, we bemoan the fact there are really at least two Adventist churches. One's headquartered in Southern California, and the other is and with a few satellite branches around some of its higher institutions of higher learning, and then the institutional church, which cannot bring itself to ever move away from that which has been shown to be foolhardy. I think a good example of that, I was just reading some material last night, read an old interview of Walter Ray and how the church dealt with him. When his material first was becoming public, the church, this committee that met with him down in Glendale, I think it was, California, acknowledged the problems and acknowledged that it needed to be studied and the church needed to be educated about to give it a proper view of Ellen White and her role in the founding of the church. And within a couple of weeks, the church was backpedaling from that. And the conference president who was down there, who was one of the members of that committee that agreed the church needed to be educated away from this exalted view, was lying about what had happened at the committee. So every time the church gets an opportunity, it seems to me, and there was another opportunity when Veltman's report came out, where it could have started moving people to a more reasonable view of Ellen White's role and how her role should be viewed in the future, it backpedals and just can't bring itself to do that because it fears casualties among some of the most conservative membership. And so I've got a very skeptical view, and it probably won't surprise you to know what a lot of the people here know, and that is that I haven't been a member of the church for a few decades, but it's where I came from. It's my youth. And I'm a boy who, when he was in the 6th grade, went to every evangelistic sermon and wrote down every text that was preached by the pastor and looked it up afterwards and got the printed sermons and preached them to teddy bears in my bedroom. And then it was kind of disillusioning to go to college and learn that that was not the right way to use the Bible, to view the Bible, these picking out isolated texts. And now I'm kind of lost as to where I'm going with this. But I'm just, the history of the early church, when one reads it, this idea, it wasn't enough to just say, we've been reading our Bibles and we think the Sabbath is a good idea. It was not only is the Sabbath a good idea, but if you don't buy it too, you're going to hell. You're going to be lost. And the same thing true with the right view of some of the other doctrines. So I'm not very optimistic about the future of the church because I see these two churches that I think exist in reality are moving farther and farther apart.
Thank you, Art.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know you're hard on this, and we've talked about it a lot. Speaking of the church, Jeffrey, it does occur to me, and this is a question that I want to ask Nick Taliaferro sometime. I do wonder why we have an African American NAD president who remains almost completely silent about these things. There's one conference leader in the US, Christian Josiah. I hold him in high esteem in Central States Conference, who from an Adventist office speaks up. Everybody else has been very, very quiet. And it's a little embarrassing. Bob, are you there?
Yes, thank you.
Join in the conversation. By the way, I'm keeping an eye on the time here. I think we have time for those we have left. Jeff, if we go a little over, can you stay past it all?
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Okay. Bob, go ahead.
Well, Jeff early on said that outrage, fear, and anger are the most powerful motivators of people, and I have seen that is absolutely the case. Certainly in the MAGA movement, and it was true in left movements also. So, are we fighting against human nature? You know, here at the Pioneer Memorial Church, they attempt to have small groups, and they've been sometimes successful. And at the same time that they would have a Revelation seminar, they would have something like a Matthew seminar. Actually, it was a small group about the Gospels. Guess which one the people flocked to? Revelation seminar.
Yeah.
Not many takers on Gospel of Matthew. So are we fighting against human nature? Now, as far as Adventists are concerned, it seems to me that Christian nationalism and the things that have gone with it, like Sunday laws, are something that you could quote great controversy against a lot, which seems to me that would bring conservative Adventism into alignment with what you're advocating.
Yeah.
What do you say to that?
Well,
Great
yes.
question.
Yeah, great question. First of all, it is truly an honor to take a question from my former New Testament professor, Dr. Johnston. Thank you. I remember very fondly taking courses from you, especially the Gospel of Mark. So it still stays with me. Right here I have files with my notes still from your course. So
Oh,
right
thank
there.
you.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah. No, that's such a great insight about the Gospel of Matthew class versus the Revelation class. Yeah, human nature for sure. And I think that was the point I think I was trying to kind of in a way make about, the algorithm doesn't care who you are. It's gonna feed fear and all these worries that we have, and that's what it's gonna drive people is all those internal things we have, all our fears as human beings and so on. Yeah, so yeah, I think that now, yeah, and please help me. What was it? The last part of your question was remind me again.
About great controversy.
Yes, the great controversy.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great insight. I agree. I think I think that, it's funny to me is that I've been saying all along that why that I've seen so many Adventists get caught up in this, but it hasn't only been until recently that suddenly there's been some of these groups have been talking about the Sunday. There's been some things in the news about why we need a national day of rest. There's all of a sudden they've been talking about this. If I don't know if you've been paying attention to the news, and all of a sudden now the church is starting to say, "Oh, wow, okay, we need to be concerned about this talk about Christian nationalism," or I've seen some people being more worried about it. So it hasn't been just recently that until they hear the key word Sunday laws that people start waking up. So
Yeah,
yeah,
but then Charlie Kirk comes along, who was an
right. He likes the
unrepentant
Sabbath.
Christian nationalist, and he liked the Sabbath so well.
Yeah,
Christian
let's have him
nationalism
come to
must
our
be
church and
okay.
speak. Yeah.
Yeah, I just kind of blows my mind of all the things that Ellen White said that haven't amounted to a whole lot, like how we
Right.
should eat or other things. The
Yeah.
one big principle out of the great controversy was don't entangle religion and government.
Right.
And all of a sudden, that is just doesn't seem
Yeah.
to
Well,
be.
we have to wait until we hear the buzzwords, and then we know that exactly. Then okay, it's going to line up exactly like she said, and then we can. Yeah. So
Dr. Courtney, I have been trying to get a hold of you to line you up to teach for us I'm scheduling out into August, September, October right now. So answer my emails or my Facebook messages. So glad to have you on.
Good to be here. We'll talk. We'll talk. But I just wanted to. It's interesting you guys just brought up Charlie Kirk because I actually was wanting to say one of the issues that you brought up about why is it that the left doesn't seem to have as much organization, like financially and all these other kinds of things. And to me, the obvious answer is just self-preservation. Individuals are self-preserving and self-serving, and organizations are self-preserving and self-serving. So when you have, I mean, and not to say that the left doesn't have people who are millionaires and billionaires. Obviously, there are on, in any political uh, party or lean or part of the spectrum. But if you have one kind of coalition that's saying we're going to give rights to corporations and we're going to make sure that billionaires be taxed at the lowest rate possible and all these other kinds of things. I mean, it's not really all that mysterious as to why one side that's saying that would have much more capital in those people who are organizing things like Facebook, for example,
Hmm.
who are in control of social media, and you have the guy who's in charge of Twitter who's aligned in that side. So now you have the resources financially, and you have the resources through the avenues of social media to advance the message that helps them to preserve themselves. And I would say that very similarly, that's why we kind of see our church having the same kinds of things happen because just as you guys were saying with Charlie Kirk, all it takes is somebody to say something that seems like it's helping us to advance what our identity is that we're
Mm.
going to glom onto them. So all Charlie Kirk has to say is, "Oh, I like the Sabbath," and then it's like, "Oh, yes, he's such a
Mm.
great guy," or
Right.
we have people who are out here trying to take away women's rights, and for decades we've had this narrative that women, I will never forget in the 2015 GC, one of the delegates got up and was like, I don't know why these women want to be pastors because the best thing for women to do is to be a wife and a mother, and that's all that they should want to do. And so like you have the trad wife movement coming up, and you have all these MAGA very anti-woman coded things. And so the church is like, oh yeah, so that's what we've been preaching. So why don't we align ourselves with that? And so I just see we should not be surprised that there's an alignment with people who are saying the same things that kind of make us feel validated as in our different messages, whether they're good messages or bad messages, it doesn't matter as long as it's promoting kind of what the church has been saying. Then those people in that movement is going to be what the church wants to align itself with.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Ray. That's a great insight.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Courtney, and we'll be in touch. Yeah. Paul, well, by the way, before I finish up, you're going to have the last word here. Before I finish up, let me remind you, next week, we're doing a Bible study. We're doing a deep dive into one of the stories from the Gospel of John. And I've talked to Linda about it. She's got a great class for us. I'm really looking forward to it. So uh, be there. Paul, go ahead and have the last word, and then I'll finish up.
No pressure, thank you. I can tell you that I'm in a cold sweat here. This is the first time I've done this, and my heart's beating at about 4,000 beats a minute, and I'm an Australian, so good luck with understanding me. One of my first observations is that some of the words you Americans use are different we use the same word, but it has a different meaning. So I hope that I don't say something that offends anyone or we get this wrong. So the biggest thing, Jeff, do we call you Jeff or Jeffrey?
Jeff's fine. Thank you, Paul.
Jeff, I didn't see the beginning of your presentation because I have to this starts at 3:30 in the morning for me.
Oh, wow.
So,
Good morning.
yeah, thank you. the biggest thing that hits me from this sort of conversation is that the awareness of these issues drives me to want to be a person to other people. And I think, you know, I love the conversation, and I noticed that you pointed out that one of the ways to handle this in our lives as Christians is to embrace people, and it doesn't matter what they think. And we suffer the same, not suffer, we experience the same things that you guys are talking about over there in Australia, not to the same depth or extent, I think, but it doesn't matter what you think. People still need to be embraced. That's what I find in my Christian community. So I encourage us all, you know, it does scare the hell out of me too, to know what's happening behind the scenes. And I struggle with how I can deal with it, but I know I can embrace my fellow brothers and sisters. So that's my thought for today. Yep.
Very good, Paul. You did just fine.
You did great.
Where women glow and men thunder. So you did just great. And thank you. I have a friend who was walking along a beach near up in Queensland, and had some guy come up to her and just evangelize for Donald Trump. And I said, "What does he have to do with it?" She said, "There are people here who do that. They think that whole scheme, they bought into it. It's not your country, man."
Yeah.
I don't quite get it. Jeffrey, do you have anything to say to us as we sign off? And
well,
thank you very much.
You know, I appreciate what I think Paul is a beautiful way to end, and that it actually goes back to our very first thought that we had as a Dennis, right? It was and you know, we talked about kind of his idea of, you know, or I called it the analog communities. And I think the more we can try to be face to face with people and in person, and not to any way to diminish, you know, I do online teaching and with a lot of my students, and there is some time and place for that, and to network and be with people that you don't get to you know, to see face to face regularly. But the more we can be face to face with people and see people, look people in the eyes and see people for who they really are, and as much as we can create opportunities to be with people that are different than us and, you know, see the world the way we do. And I also mean that, you know, look at the world differently, you know, maybe even politically, and get out of our echo chambers. And I'm thinking of myself, you know, I can curate my own world. I have my Instagram feed or whatever, my Facebook feed, exactly how I want it. And the more I can get out of that and try to listen to other people and the way they see things, I think will help us all go a long ways. Not that we're going to solve all these problems which are enormous problems that we've identified today, but I think it will help us, you know, at least in our sphere that we can control, that we can make it'll help us, at least as human beings, be more human.
Yeah. And I'm going to send you a note, Jeffrey, if you could recommend a few people who might have participated in that symposium that maybe I could rope into.
It is. I think it's all now up online. You can watch all of the whole entire symposium. I think it's on the School of Religion's website. I think there's a link to it. Yeah. I can send you I'll actually, if you email me, I think I can find it and send you the link.
Not a problem. I'll look it up. I've known Zach for a long time. I've tried to get him to teach, and we haven't succeeded yet, but
I'll see if I can.
We will do that.
I'll see if I can twist his arm for you.
And put his arm up behind his back and see if you can get him to do that. Thank you very much. It was excellent.
Good
See
to be
you
back
all
with
next
everybody. Thank you.
week.